and welcome to another episode of Off the Ruck with me, John Ferguson. Well, unfortunately, the Wallabies have suffered their first loss of the year and of the first three games of the British and Irish Lions, losing 27-19 in Brisbane at Suncorp Stadium. Today, we're going to get through a breakdown of that loss, and we're going to have a look back at the key players, key moments, and what we think it can improve from that game and what we should take away from it as Wallaby supporters. And also, of course, and what we can expect from the British and Irish Lions team as well. I went into the studio and had hosted by the Scrumbags Pod boys, Mitch from Scrumbags. So we're going to head into that interview right now.
A lot to unpack from this game, John, and I'll get your first thoughts just generally. What were your thoughts from the game?
I thought that we struggled in areas where I didn't think we would struggle, and then we were better in other areas where I thought that the Lions would have the wood over us. But overall, I thought that the Lions, the visitors, they brought their fans and they brought their energy, and they definitely brought a lot of aggression. And frankly, I think I surmised it straight after the game on X, and I just said that we were outmuscled and outclassed. They just had that level on us all game, and when things weren't going right for us, it looked pretty poor. When things weren't going right for them, it just kind of looked more so scrappy from our end as opposed to we were ever really in command. So ring rusty, yeah, sure, but also I think they just lacked an element of game control that we probably needed. Sorry.
Yeah, I think for mine, it particularly looked like the Wallabies' first test in 2024. 2025. Sorry, we have that Fiji game a few weeks ago, but really pretty rusty performance from the Wallabies, and they took a long time to kind of warm up into that game. I guess you could say it was the old cliche of a game of two halves. I think the Lions were pretty dominant in that first half and sort of dictating a lot of the pace of the game. The second half, the Wallabies sort of woke up a little bit. Yes, they let the Lions score quickly in the first minute or so of the second half, but from there it kind of became all Wallabies, which was, I guess, a positive to finish the game on. But at that point, it kind of felt like it was a bit of a mountain too far to climb for the Wallabies, letting the Lions get too far ahead.
No, I totally agree. It was obviously very hot out of the blocks from the Lions. We managed to scrape back a try with Max Jorgensen, which honestly, I have never heard a pub go off like that when a try has been scored. I can only imagine what a pub was like full of Australians watching the Jorgensen try at Twickenham. But overall, I think that from as much as because I was in Sydney, I was watching it from a pub in Sydney, the energy and the vibe and the camaraderie amongst Wallabies and Lions supporters, just awesome. So I'd recommend everyone who perhaps watched this one at home, just because it's not in their state, I would highly recommend to get out to a pub and enjoy it, because it was truly a new experience for me, because last time the Lions came through, I was actually underage, so I couldn't be in a pub. And that just goes to show how rare these occasions are. So definitely get out amongst the people that love rugby as well. Find your little watering hole and enjoy the rugby, even though we lost. But I think we'll get into things now, Mitch, that will say that the positives that we can take out of it, but also perhaps some negatives that we'll highlight, and we'll go into some more detail on them as well. Where do you think that the Wallabies truly struggled throughout the 80?
I think one of the areas that the British and Irish Lions put us under a heap of pressure, and particularly in that first half, was at the Ruck. And that was one of the things that we highlighted, and a lot of pundits have highlighted in the lead up to this game, that they thought that was one area that the Wallabies could actually target and get quick ruck ball and go quite hard at the Lions. Fraser McRight's a great pilferer, get him over the ball. He was trying to do that. I didn't think Ben O'Keefe kind of rewarded him as often as he probably should have or could have been rewarded. But just even on our own ball, the Lions were just consistently offside, making it really difficult for the Wallabies to actually play from their own ruck. Tom Curry, was just an absolute pest around that ruck on our side of the ball. There was a tactic that the Lions used, and they just weren't getting pinged for it. And so they continued to do it all game, where they would have players come through the ruck and either lie on the ball or around the ball, or even just stand up in the channel when Tate McDermott or Jake Gordon was actually going to try and play the ball. And there was one penalty early in the second half against the Wallabies, which could have very easily gone for the Wallabies, where Curry was just loitering around that ruck space, completely offside, had no reason to be there, should have been pinged for it. and the Wallabies end up trying to get around him and got an obstruction call against them, which was frustrating. And Joe Schmidt sort of highlighted that in his post game, that it was hard for the Wallabies to get into the game because it felt a lot of the times like they had Lions players literally standing next to them as they were trying to play the ball. And obviously the refereeing team didn't think that was an area that needed to be adjudicated as well. And all credit to the Lions. I mean, they played the whistle perfectly. They continued to do it. They weren't getting pinged for it. But that's one area that I felt like we didn't adapt quick enough. We didn't sort of work around that, and we didn't play quick enough, and we allowed the Lions to slow us down, which stifled our attack significantly.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. What I think there were a bunch of calls and bounces of the ball that the 50-50s were just going the Lions' way. And that's just rugby sometimes. Schmidt said as much as in his post-match press conference. Sometimes you just get those. But it nonetheless felt that those moments really hurt the Wallabies more so than it did the Lions. And that was more so because the Lions were so clearly playing to a much more effective game plan, and they were doing it with too greater effect. We struggled to hold on to ball. We threw balls onto the deck. It really wasn't a polished performance at all. And there were some crucially missed opportunities because players weren't executing. Fraser McWright, one of the poorest with ball in hand, I thought, when it came to distributing or be able to put someone next to him away. Likewise, Joseph Akuso-Suaalii. So there were some big players that needed to step up and have some big moments, and I think they really failed to fire. And no, by no means am I laying the defeat at the feet of certain players. It's more so just like when these games are really tough, you expect your key players to be able to stand up. And I thought they were kept relatively quiet, as you highlighted Tom Curry there. I think he vindicated his selection absolutely. I thought that he was extremely impressive. Test match animal, that saying exists for a reason, and I thought Tom truly stepped up to that. I'm not saying that Jack Morgan wouldn't have been able to do similar things. I just think that Tom Curry has to be applauded for his amazing game that he did have. But on the breakdown, Mitch, I think that what's interesting is that people often complain about the lack of consistency, but most rugby pundits and rugby players say, well, there must be a consistency amongst rugby referees for their own consistency. And I thought that Ben O'Keefe's ruling at the breakdown was vastly different to how he refereed the game in Perth against the British and Irish Lions, where Tyburn really did struggle against the Western Force at the breakdown. I was called out of it on several occasions. So on that, I thought that there was a huge swing, and I wouldn't be surprised that if the because as you mentioned, you and I had that conversation about it being an area where they could actually expose the British and Irish Lions. That change for me was actually a really big underlying factor as to why the Wallabies struggled so much, because all of a sudden they had a safety draw card to be able to go to, and then whether the Lions wouldn't be able to engage in, and then all of a sudden they were allowed to do that, and more, as you alluded to, as players standing in the ruck. So that was a really crucial ruling. I'm not saying this game hung on a refereeing decision or ruling, but nonetheless, that did make it very hard for the Wallabies to be able to understand and be able to play that game to the whistle.
Yeah, I think what's really going to be interesting moving forward now, and I've had discussions with various people today, Sunday, we're recording this after the game, so the morning or the afternoon after the test match, is that consistency across refereeing team now into the second and third test. And like you highlighted there, Ben O'Keefe is the first, it has refereed a game on this series already. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've seen either of the other two. I feel like we've had...
I think we had Andre Piatti for... I think we've had both Amasha Kelly and Andrew Piatti. Yeah, I'm unsure.
There's been so much
rugby.
He
refereed the Fiji game, but yeah.
Sorry, but
I think we've seen
not like a Lions game, but
yeah.
Wasn't that a French referee that we had in that game? Anyway,
I do. Think so,
whatever it was.
We digress.
I think the difficult thing is going to be that if there is a different interpretation to the breakdown, a different interpretation to the way the game's officiated for the second test, that's going to be a massive swing and could affect both teams drastically. One of the areas that I've seen quite a few comments online since the game last night finished was around the adjudication of foul play. And we know that New Zealand referees tend to go quite lenient, I guess, on foul play, particularly head contact. Any other, if that was an English ref or an Irish ref, I think we would have seen 2 or 3 yellow cards given out to the Lions, and they didn't get a single one. Ben O'Keefe was trying very much to try and keep 15 on 15 to the detriment of the welfare of the Wallabies at some points in the game. And so I really hope moving forward that is a consistent sort of theme across this refereeing team, because you wouldn't want to go into that second test and a similar incident happens where the Wallabies, make accidental head contact and they're given a card for it straight away, yellow or upgraded to red. And so we've already seen this first test has to be a line in the sand and say this is where we move forward. Moving, I guess, away from refereeing decisions, because that's not what you want to sort of focus on.
Just on that though, I think we should highlight and be specific about what we're talking about, because it is important to be able to give an area, to give some sort of analysis. That's what we're doing here. Sure. We're trying to give some sort of analysis,
constructive feedback.
So, yeah, exactly. So, Tom Curry tackled Tom Liner in the air. There's no ambiguity about the fact that Tom Liner was in the air. Now, Joe Schmidt shrugged it off and said that, he didn't injure himself, sure. That's not what the ruling is. You don't rule an intention. Yeah, you don't rule an intention. So I think Lions players and supporters would say, yeah, that should probably be a yellow card. And should it happen to a Lions player, it would probably be a yellow card. And then another incident was where Len Ikitau was trying to pull out of a ruck, a defensive ruck, and Tyg Burn came in and cleared him out and copped him in the face. Now, that was accidental. It met the high contact threshold, and that probably would be called a yellow card based on just the head contact that was made. And I don't think Tyg Burn was particularly ever really that low. So I think that would have been where that would have been a call that refs probably would have erred on the side of caution, although
and interestingly,
was rising.
In that one, I found it very unusual that Ben O'Keefe used the mitigation that Len Ikitau was rising in the contact for it to be a mitigation away from.
I've never heard that before.
It's usually the other way around. It's like if you're coming down into contact, like if you're rising into contact all day, all through Super Rugby, it's gone up because you're rising into contact, you're getting closer to head contact. If Len Ikitau was going lower into contact, then we're looking at a worse outcome. And I think the outcome from that situation, a penalty only, and I can't remember if they scored directly off it or soon afterwards, but Len Ikitau went off for a HIA soon after that game and didn't return. And so there are ramifications now. Like, we haven't officially heard whether he failed that HIA. The fact that he didn't return indicates that he did, and that means he's now not available for selection in Game 2.
Yep. It's a great point to outline, and we just hope that's not the case for Len Ikitau, because he was one of our best. And we'll get onto the positives very soon. And then the final incident was Ben Earl's no-arms tackle on Joseph Akuso-Suaalii really close to the line. A penalty. I'm not saying yellow card. If there was an attempt to wrap, I'm not going to go into the details of that. But a penalty try, yeah. That sounds
well. So if he in the ruling of the law book, if you cause foul play to stop a try and a probable try being scored, where Suaalii actually would have scored that try, maybe they could have mitigated it down because there was a fullback or there was cover coming through. But there would be grounds to award a penalty try as well, I believe.
And like we said before we got into the breakdown of this, and we'll move on now, but it's more so just that we want to see this consistently held throughout the series. Yeah. Like, if there is a yellow card to a Wallabies player for a similar incident of any of these three examples, there will be so much uproar, because it's about just being able to make the series what it is, and we just can't have it in one instance or another. And this is us before even it gets to that point. Yeah. So we're not saying this after it's happened. We're just saying that this needs to be something that carries on, and this has to be consistent for the rest of the series. I'm not saying that these refs need to ref consistently for the rest of their lives or their careers or whatever, but that needs to be the conversation that people are having at the highest level heading into the game. These games, the game 2 and 3, which the Wallabies need to win at least one of to be able to keep this series alive. So, Mitch, I'll throw to you now. Who impressed you from the Wallabies? Because we have been a little bit negative on it. It was a loss, and the Wallabies did get quite dominated. But who impressed you from the Wallabies?
Yeah, I think first of all we go with the man who gets his debut for the Wallabies, starting in the first time in gold in a Lions series, Nick Champion de Crepney. I thought that, with the impact, the impact on the selection of Rob Valetini being injured and not being there. And Will Skelton, another player, across the board, I think we really lacked that physicality, particularly in ball carry. And Nick Champion de Crepney and Harry Wilson both stepped up in that factor, both offensively and defensively, like with ball in hand. They bent the line. Harry Wilson strangely had like 4 kicks in this game, which was just ridiculous. But Nick Champion de Crepney, I thought, everything we needed from a six, a physical six. He did. He was putting hits on all over the place. When Scuffle was carrying on, he was up there in the face of the Lions as well. And so for a player coming into this fixture, coming into this Wallabies environment for the first time, getting his debut, I thought he definitely stood up.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. I thought he was really impressive, especially on the defensive side of the ball. He is a defensive player. I had a chat with Lockie, one of the co-hosts of the Scrumbags pod, during Super Rugby Pacific, just before we headed into the tests window. And I was highlighting how different players have certain defensive, like a prominent defensive stats or attacking stats. Nick Champion de Crespigny is very much prominent in the defensive side of stats. He's a dominant tackler. He makes a lot of them, and he's a very good chop tackler, which is something that Joe Schmidt admires and likes in players. And he did that again. I think he tackled, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, but I think it's something like 23 tackles in total. Like, the guy was absolutely immense. Yep. He obviously didn't carry as well, but I think that is a bigger issue when you look at the stats of Harry Wilson. I think he carried some like really low numbers compared to how he usually carries, and I don't know where those carries were made up from, unfortunately, because I didn't have a look at the carrying stats for the entire team, but that was something that jumped out at me. Where everywhere where I read and had a look at who was doing where and Wallabies rating and stuff like that, Harry Wilson carried a low amount of times, and that can't be the case when you've got no Rob Valentini in your pack and no Angus Bell either. Although, on saying that, despite James Slipper missing a couple of tackles here and there, Alan Alatoa and James Slipper kept that scrum tight and kept the really impressive front row of the Lions very quiet. So I was very impressed with the old dogs, and I thought that they did exactly what you expect out of them. Work rate, work rate, work rate. There were a couple of times there where I think Alan Alatoa actually shifted momentum for the Wallabies and managed to wrestle some back. And I was really impressed with what we managed to achieve at scrum time, because people were starting to say, "Oh, I don't know. I think that the Wallaby scrum's going to struggle." But I think the old dogs just proved that they have a bunch of new tricks up their sleeve.
Can I just say on scrum time, like for the second test, can we please officiate straight feeds in the scrum? Like Gibson Park was literally feeding the ball under the flanker's foot. Like that was a piss take. Like, come on, put it down the middle. At least Jake Gordon had it at least hitting the props. I don't think they even hooked. They didn't even need to hook the Lions. They just fed it straight out the back of the scrum. Anyway, I digress. I think that we could go through and talk about players that stood up, and I am conscious of time, and you've only got a certain amount of time on the pod today. So I think one of the areas I just wanted to quickly talk about was the attacking structure that the Wallabies brought into this game, and how with the selection of the team that they put in place, I feel like it might not have been as, particularly that first half, it didn't seem to flow with the players. So there was a clear intent from the Wallabies to kick the ball behind the back of the Lions, like to try and find space. And no more evident is that than when you've got your number 8 who's in the middle of the field with an overlap and he puts the ball on the toe. Like it felt at times like the wording from the attack from the Wallabies coaches was to try and get the ball into space and play it behind them and don't run the ball at the line. Harry Potter put a kick in when he was, he needed to just tuck the ball under his arm and just hit the line at speed. In that first half, I don't think we even hit the line more than 5 or 6 times. It just felt like we were going to a kick strategy, and it didn't pay off.
Yeah, I think watching the game and kind of reflecting on how the Wallabies decided to go at the Lions, I do agree. It was very boot heavy. I don't have such a much of an issue with that, but you just have to have something to follow. You can't that can't be the end of your strategy. You've got to be able to follow through on it. And something that the Lions did, they retrieved it, ran it back, or kicked it. But when they did, they kicked with intent, and they won a lot of the aerial combats. And they chased really well, and sometimes the ball was allowed to hit the deck on the Wallabies side, and that can't be happening. And so, and I don't think this actually is direct. This is not a critique directed at any specific players or the wingers or anything like that, but it's just about the structures, about who's going up and volunteering, like putting their hand up and saying, "I'm going to grab this ball." And so that was a huge issue with our kicking strategy, that they felt like it was a half-baked thought more so than being a complete strategy. And then also I'll make a video on video analysis on off the Ruck YouTube channel later in the week about how that Wallabies attack attempted to work. But there's this loop around play that happens where one of the players receives the ball in front. there's a player coming out the back, and instead of going out the back of a Joseph Akuso-Suaalii, they come into the line and Joseph switches out. So you create an artificial overlap. And because the Lions' rush defense was so aggressive, and the player behind, who was usually Tom Liner, wasn't hitting it straight enough, Joseph Akuso-Suaalii who usually was on that outer channel as a 13, was often receiving the ball with way less time and more flat-footed than he was doing so against the Fijians, because they ran similar patterns against the Fijians, and it's just something that's going to have to be a quicker movement if they want to achieve that, because they did get outside the lines a couple of times, but then, as you mentioned, they had a mind to kick the ball away. So it was just, again, rusty. That's like kind of what we're going to have to say about the performance, because it was. But nonetheless, there were things that they were trying. Some things were half working. But again, they got to a certain point and it just never felt like they were fully ready to kind of follow through with what was going to happen after whatever happened.
One thing I want to talk about, and I've seen a lot of comments on social media, is around who plays next week. And so one of the trends that's coming through is that the impact from the bench seemed to be like it stepped up the Wallabies game and it got them back into the contest. Now, I think what needs to be highlighted in that is it wasn't just individual players doing incredible things. Like that Jorgensen try, very well set up in the first half, but really it was a bit of a fluky contest in the air and skills for him to get around the fullback and score. In the second half, I think Carlo Tizzano particularly scores that try well, but there was a shift in approach to attack from the Wallabies to go straighter at the Lions. It wasn't so much let's get around them, let's go through them. And that's where they scored the point. And so there's been a lot of comments on social media around Jake Gordon and that Tate McDermott came in and impacted a lot better in the game. But I just want to highlight to people, that's a coaching's decision. Like Tate McDermott comes on with the communication from Joe Schmidt and the coaches, how to change the attack, how to target the lines differently, because the way that they came into the game with Jake Gordon starting was the attack wasn't working, and they weren't getting around their lines as much as they were anticipating. And so I just want to throw caution to the wind to say, you start Tate next week, and you bring Jake in off the bench or Nick White off the bench, and we're having the same conversation. The finishers have a different approach, have the communication with the coaches on the sideline to be able to come in and know where they need to impact and need to change what the starters are doing. I guess that's somewhat of a transition, but what do the Wallabies need to do next week leading into Melbourne to be competitive? Do you think that the Wallabies can go and draw the series 1-1?
Yeah, honestly, I do. I think if you put... I was of the opinion that if the work rate and the grunt of this pack would be able to get through the Lions, but they just weren't accurate enough with their carrying technique. They weren't accurate enough at the clean out. And if we're going to be brutally honest, Tom Liner was often unpositioned and unready when he received a ball. And that's just him learning where he needs to be when he needs to be somewhere. Again, it's a very difficult job to come in to start your first ever test match against the British and Irish Lions, who are coming off 5 straight games and a massive tour when they're all hyper talented and experienced test players. But nonetheless, he did not play particularly well, and he was out of his depth.
Yep.
Like and as a young kid with very few tested caps experience, that's to be expected. But I think that there were often opportunities when Jake Gordon was trying to pass to a player, whether it was Tom Liner or another forward pod member, and they actually weren't ready. So Jake Gordon was getting out the ball plenty quick, but they just felt like there were players kind of standing around that weren't really ready to receive the ball. They were retreating. There was a couple of times when Nick Frost worked back after a double effort and then had to catch the ball and then run again. So
they were flat-footed, weren't they? Yeah,
we just weren't doing ourselves. Yeah, we just weren't doing ourselves any favors, and it was quite hard to watch because I think that had those players been set, we've seen what we could do with little tip balls in our pods against the Fijians. We managed to break through a couple of times, and I think that would have been achieved a couple of more times. And so what we need to do for next week, which is the question that you asked. Sorry to digress
That's all
slightly
right.
there, Mitch, but I think that the inclusion of someone like Rob Valentini, Will Skelton, I wouldn't make drastic changes to the side. It's just those little pieces that makes the other pieces work better. Sometimes it's just the cohesion and combination of different people doing roles they're used to doing. So if you put Will Skelton in center field, he's going to attract two defenders. As long as he hits well and falls forward, he's 2 meters tall, he'll get you over the gain line. Rob Valentini, one of the best ball runners in the world, it's very hard to replace that with a defensive orientated player, which is why I mentioned it in the start with Nick Champion to Krepney. And Harry Wilson had an unusually quiet game with ball in hand, and also ball on boot. Very, very loud, very fizzing game. But I think that's where the changes come from the pack. I don't think you necessarily change anything. There's been critique of Jeremy Williams. I just don't think anyone had a blistering game either.
One
I
question
thought that,
for you, just in the pack, before you get into the
go
back
for it.
line. We saw that the line out was not functioning, and the
Thank
Wallabies
you. I just great.
three or four times turned the ball over. One of the things I wanted to highlight just before earlier in the pod was what is so evident about this test fixture up against the Lions is the Lions are a team almost like New Zealand in that you make a mistake, or South Africa at the moment, you make a mistake and they'll score off it. And so we saw that early in the second half where the Wallabies overthrow the line out. Matty Fazler didn't hit the line out target of Jeremy Williams going up, and it overthrow. Tom Curry gets the ball at the back. They spread it wide and they score. And so what the Wallabies weren't doing was when they had those opportunities, they weren't finishing them off. The Lions were. And so that's where that gap comes. Back to the target conversation. How do we fix that? Like, is that a throwing issue? Is that a jumping issue? Do you need to include someone over instead of Matt Fazler to start?
Yeah, I highlighted this in the review of the Fiji game. Harry Wilson is too slow off the deck. It was regularly Harry Wilson getting beaten to the ball, and sometimes it is the thrower, but I feel like regularly Mario Toje, Joe McCarthy, Tyburn got up quicker and in front of Harry Wilson.
Yep.
And you can't have a line-out option who's either A, not the tallest, and B, getting off the deck faster. It was kind of weird not to use Nick Champion to Krepney after Joe Schmidt has repeatedly mentioned his speed off the ground at line-out time. It just felt like one of those things that you probably lack a little bit of line-out experience, and we do. You look at Jeremy Williams, look at Nick Frost. Joe Schmidt mentioned this. These are locks in their mid-20s. They're versing players in their late 20s, Joe McCarthy aside, who's an extremely talented player. But nonetheless, you have Maro Toje there and Tyburn, who are vastly experienced. And their ability to pick, that's pick at line-out is just evident now that they're just so much more experienced. You chuck someone like a Darcy Swain, a Lukan Salakai-Loto, a Liam Wright in that situation. I know that we're talking about players that are not inside the squad, but I'm just trying to illustrate how big the gap is, and then that's kind of where that comes from. And then to pick to throw to an 8 who's shorter than both their locks and their 6, who's slower off the deck. It's just it just felt like, yes, it might be the thrower, yes, it might be the jumper, but both things are just not working. And Harry Wilson is the only consistent person in that makeup. I'm not saying that he's the end all or be all of the problems of the line out, but that is very apparent that he's struggling to be able to get up and compete effectively at the line out. So again, it's more about having different options. If you have Skelton in the line out, you do limit your options. But I tell you what, Skelton's going to get you up he's going to get you up plenty quick.
Yep.
So if he's part of that lifting pod, he's going to get you up real quick and real high. So again, it's all about the machinations and combinations of what the Wallabies can work to be able to improve that. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily a throwing issue, because Matt Fezler and Dave Parecki and Billy Pollard have been really, really good and accurate when they have been on the park. So I wouldn't necessarily go there as my first thing to pick apart.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, again, it's that whole element of rust and first test or second test of a season together. I think those things will take time, and no doubt there will be a lot of line out throws and lifts being done in Wallabies camp this week. Looking across the back line now, do you think that we'll see many changes there? You did highlight that Tom Liner did struggle in that 10 jersey. Does that open the door for James O'Connor to come in? Do you think Ben Donaldson jumps in at starts as well? What changes are you expecting for the MCG test in a week's time?
I think Liner was really brave, and that's a word that Schmidt used as well, both pre and post game. I'm a little bit unsure whether. I mean, again, he was very confident. He didn't ever seem stressed, but there was just times when decisions weren't being made that needed to be made, and probably just to tell Jake Gordon being like, hey, it doesn't matter if this ball is a 4-second ruck ball, we kind of just need to be able to be set to be able to at least get to the next breakdown. And it was just one of those things where Ben Donaldson has a better relationship with Jake Gordon, so that might be a good way to get in. And then, but Tate McDermott also, like I said, he would have got the ball out just as quick. But I think that he probably would have run himself a little bit more. Not saying that would have ended up in a more positive situation, but nonetheless, that would have created a different picture to what would have happened. So he probably would have seen they're not ready. Okay, well, I'll go myself, because he's confident to do that, and that's one of his core skill sets. Further along in the back line, Suoli was exposed on several times, and I think he threw 2 balls which hit the deck that went to no one. Just because he wasn't looking, he just shoveled it, and he thought that would just hit where it was going to hit. Again, another vastly inexperienced, very, very raw, talented athlete, but he was out looking for Sione Tuipulotu time and time again, trying to land a shot on him. Tuipulotu and Hugh Jones are running rings around them. And it was really hard to watch. And now we have to wait and see what happens with Lenny Kitau, as you mentioned. But I'd be pretty confident in putting Hunter Paisami in there, because I don't want to see Lenny Kitau. I don't know exactly how many carries. Maybe you could tell me, but I think he made something like 12 carries, and they were like all into the teeth of the Lions. And I just don't think that's the best use of someone that we call Len Flickitau, who can get in between 2 players, put on a great left foot step, and offload at a moment's notice. So I think Hunter Paisami, although not the biggest centre, using him as a crash baller feels like a better use of his talents and being able to alleviate Lenny Kitau to be able to do the things that he does so well. I do think also, finally, Dylan Peach is probably a good option to bring in, and I don't know who you'd go. I think there's been a lot of negative comments aimed at Harry Potter. I don't think Harry Potter or Jorgo were like particularly better or worse than the other. They've each had moments. And I think that Tom Wright just needs to make sure that he stays in contests, because he was pretty absent that game, although effectively kept out by the Lions. But when you're such an influential player with a 10 that's not played, never started a test before, you really can't afford as a ball-playing 15 to not be involved all the time. So we just gotta see the big players step up, and we can't have them either being absent or being outplayed in these moments. Because I would say that Tom Curry outplayed Fraser McWright, Sione Tuipulotu outplayed Joseph Akuso-Suoli'i, and I'd say that despite Hugo Keenan having a bit of a nightmare night under the high ball, I think that I saw more of him than I saw of Tom Wright. So it was just one of those games where I just felt like some of the key players just weren't quite where they needed to be, especially as we were going backwards and under the pump.
Just a few stats for you, like you highlighted there. Lenny Kitau had 11 carries. Joseph Akuso-Suoli'i had 10. Fraser McRae 12, and Nick Frost had 14. Harry Wilson had 8. Jake Gordon had 2. So there's a bit of an idea of, how we were attacking and who was getting their hands on the pill. One thing that I've been thinking about, and this selection-wise, and this is reliant on Lenny Kitau being fit, passing his HI, be able to selection. What do you think of the idea of Hunter Paisami into 12, Ikitau out to 13, and Joseph Akuso-Suoli'i onto the wing?
I think that it could definitely work. The only issue that I would have is how positionally raw Joseph Akuso-Suoli'i would be on the wing, and his ability to be able to reflexively swing into a pendulum, and to be able to be that person that can kind of call the defensive line out, because I don't think he's ever defended on the wing. That's also somewhere where the Wallabies got exposed on attack, because because the Lions were so dominant on attack and we run a connected line speed defense, the fold wasn't getting to where it needed to be, and that's where we constantly got exposed on the edges for like Dan Sheehan's try, for example. So it would just, and with his league background, and this is me preempting something that may actually not be the case, they have a tendency to bite in, and that would only exacerbate that issue of being short players. But again, he's a great student of the game. We see how much he cares. So I'm not ruling it out, and it would definitely increase the size of our backline, especially if we had Peach on the other wing, weight-wise, height-wise, and everything. So definitely a good idea.
I just feel like
Definitely
it
an idea.
allows a kicking option more. Like we saw Jorgo get up under the high ball. If we had Jorgo on the left
Mm,
wing, Sully on the right wing, you kick to him on the right wing. We know how good he is under the high ball. We
mm,
potentially, if the Lions go with the same with Hugo Keenan at 15 again, that's another
mm.
aerial attack that we could target.
Oh, that's who you should target. That every day of the week. I don't think Lowe or Freeman were particularly impressive,
Hmm.
but 100%. Like if you're targeting anyone in that back line, you're targeting Hugo Keenan at the back.
So we are one area is concerning that if Lenny Katau is not available for selection, has failed his HIA. I don't personally feel confident in throwing in Hunter Paisami and Joseph Akuso-Suli in the centres together, considering they have not played a minute there. We know that
Mm,
Joseph Akuso-Suli has got a relationship with Lenny Kitau. He has played
mm,
there with him. He came into this test feeling confident that they're starting to read each other, talking in the media
mm.
about, picking up cues. He doesn't give him a lot of verbal communication, but he just starts to read his body language and the cues that he gives him. I feel like
Yep.
that could really backfire, having a completely
Yep.
raw and new centre combination.
Yep. No, absolutely. I'm with you there, and so we'll just have to wait and hope and see that news. What I Another thing I would highlight is probably that the Lions were probably unfortunate not to score more tries. Um, and it's just one of those things that I want Australian rugby fans to be cautious of when they're talking about this game, because sure, the bounce of the ball didn't go our way, and some of the refereeing calls neither did, but they scrapped maybe two or three genuine opportunities, and they also kicked for 3 points twice. That's test match rugby. That's the way you do it. But the way that they were felt pretty dominant in the first 40, that could have easily been one or two more tries, and that score would have looked proper ugly. So a lot to work on, unfortunately.
That
It
is a
really is. It's
great
not the best place to be at.
Beautiful transition. So we'll finish the pod here, but I just want to get your quick thoughts on what do the Wallabies need to do differently for the second test? What if they're a shot at getting a win in Melbourne and they're going 1-1? What do they need to do differently?
Aerial game needs to be 100% the Wallabies.
Yep.
That needs to be dominant, because that way we get territory, we get opportunities to turn them around, and we also get an opportunity to reshuffle their structures. And the more opportunities the Wallabies can put the Lions in situations where they're having to rejig, the more the lack of cohesion will become clear. And then I think also bigger ball carriers being more direct. And I think that also just speaks to being able to have someone who controls the tempo. Just because you get quick ball doesn't mean you need to go quickly,
Yep.
although you'd ideally like to in an ideal scenario. But as we know, that there's 15 blokes on the other side of the field, then trying to make it into an unideal scenario. So and then also just like we can't be losing our own line-out ball, particularly when we've got players that are like Nick Frost, 204 centimeters tall, extremely good in the air. Jeremy Williams typically very good in the air. We can't be losing our own line-outs, particularly when we've just got a penalty. So that is something that's going to have to change really quickly. We have the strength in the scrum. We know we can apply pressure. We have someone like a Taniela Tupou, who, should his form be good enough in the Pacifica First Nations Combine, but should he be good enough there, then he could come out and really add some ballast and strength. Will Skelton as well. We could turn that into a place where we milk some penalties. But it is really about doing the basics really well, because that's what let us down. We dropped so many passes, we threw them to the air, and we didn't kick particularly accurately. I think has those things happen, along with one or two 50-50 calls, we can put ourselves in a world where that could have been a closer game.
Yep. God, can you imagine the storylines if both Taniela Tupou and Lukan Salakaia-Loto get picked out of that First Nations Pacifica squad and into the Wallaby squad for the second test in some fixture?
I mean, I tell you what,
That'd be
Lukan
crazy.
Salakaia-Loto, he's putting his hand up.
He is.
Tupou's form aside, if there's one player who's come roaring back into form, it's Lukan Salakaia-Loto. So, I'm a big fan of Lukan. He would look good in a Wallabies jersey with the green collar. So I'm about it.
I love to see Tupou feature as well. I'm a big fan of Tupou. I think the Wallabies need to play a bit more direct. I think we saw in the second half the change of tactic of they kicked better, they kicked for space, they actually contested more, but they also held the ball and attacked the Lions. They played in their 22. I think that's key for the Wallabies in this second test. We saw that once they got into the Lions half, and played from there, the Lions were starting to get pinged for penalties. They could have very well got given a card for repeated offsides and infringements. They got a number of warnings. And so I wonder if that's another an area where the Wallabies can exploit. They also won the second half. The Lions scored 8 points. The Wallabies scored 14. And so there is another 10 minutes in that game. The Wallabies could have scored again, and we could have had a real test on our hands. I think they'll take a lot more of a positive from that second half than the Lions will. And the impact that the Wallabies brought on the bench was better than what the Lions did. And so there are still some real positives about this second test. I know that it's a bit disheartening for Wallabies fans to see this result today, the fact that we didn't win, how well the Lions played that first half. But I would also caution Wallabies fans, like you were saying, to be optimistic and think about what the Lions can bring. I just think that the way that the Wallabies eased themselves into the game, built through the 80 minutes, that they looked hot on attack in that last half, in the last 20 minutes of the game. And if they bring that from the kickoff in Melbourne for Test 2, I think we're up for a real test.
Yeah, no, fingers crossed, and a lot to work on. Obviously, this is just the breakdown of the loss. We'll go into what can happen in the future a little bit later in the week. But fingers crossed that things get worked on very hard during the week.
Great. Well, thanks for joining me today, John. Thanks everyone for getting to this point of the podcast, listening in. Heaps of content to go. Series is not over yet. There are still 2 tests to go. It is 1-0 to the British and Irish Lions, but no reason why the Wallabies can't get 1-1 in Melbourne and take it to a decider in Sydney.
Thanks so much, guys, for getting to this point of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. This is going to be a running series when we break down the Wallabies games right after the games has happened, and we would love to hear for what you guys think about it as well. Like, subscribe, comment, please, down here somewhere, and then also don't forget to follow us on Instagram or TikTok or wherever you get your rugby content from. More to come during the week. I'll be doing a video analysis piece on the Wallabies and the Lions attack/defense, and we'll be getting into all those good things. So until the next time, enjoy.